member of Ukrainian parliament and leader of the Golos party. And I'm talking to you from Kiev, Ukraine. The topic that we are discussing is what would the world look like after the catastrophe. Catastrophe, I believe, is the active phase of war that Russia started on Ukraine. You know, yesterday we had a parliamentary sitting and we had UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking to us. He said one important point that touched the hearts of every Ukrainian. He said, we understand that we were wrong, that the war started in 2014 and we as Western countries allowed this war to happen. And it was so touching and so personally important because this is something that we as Ukraine have been telling the world for the last 8 years. You know how it feels? It feels like you are a victim of a rape and there are 10 people in the room and all looking to the side. And you're screaming and they're just saying, well, maybe you're imagining it. So that's what it felt like to be Ukraine for the last 8 years. And I do like that countries start to acknowledge that. That for the last 8 years, Putin was getting ready for this war. He was accumulating funds on his accounts and he entered this war in $760 billion having saved. He saved it by saving money on selling to European countries Russian gas and oil and coal. And while we said that it's extremely dangerous, everybody was just looking to the side. So what Boris Johnson said is actually a question that right now, after the active phase of the war started, the whole world is asking themselves, like, what were the institutions that were supposed to prevent this? Who is responsible now and how do we deal with this? I have my own opinion on that. So all the institutions were established after the Second World War. It's 80 years ago. Enough for people, for countries, to forget the lessons. Like the lesson that aggressor cannot be tamed. You cannot hush the dictator. And what you do really need to do is always have united front where the checks and balance are making sure that dictatorship does not come back, that Nazism does not come back. But it happened. I think it happened because political statements were more important than people's lives and money were more important than truth. But we have what we have, and now we need to think about the new world that we will be building. Same as the lies, we're building the new world after the Second World War. So what are the questions that we are asking ourselves when we are thinking about what the new structure of the world would look like? Well, the first question is, are we for effectiveness or are we for the rules that we set previously? And this is very important. We have seen this with NATO. We have seen this with European institutions. That rules were much more important than getting things done. And I do believe that the new world is just too cruel to that. So when you need to fight Putin, you need to fight Putin and not fill in some extreme additional paperwork. The second question that we are asking ourselves when building this new world is, are we really for our values or are we for the agreements that we had before? And the great example of that is the United Nations, the organization that still cannot exclude Putin and Russia of it. So nations are still united with Russia. And it happens in an organization that was specifically supposed to prevent the war that is happening right now. And when I'm asking them, they're saying, oh, you know, it's so much paperwork, plus we have those rules where Russia has the veto vote, so we can only postpone them in the Security Council. So if you look like from the helicopter view, is it like even the way it should be? Is it like, are the nations even want to be united with Russia? Or maybe this organization needs to be reconsidered as well? In this new world that we are building, we will need to ask ourselves questions regarding what the security agreement looks like. It's a good question because, you know, the NATO's Chapter 5, it has this clause about 60 days. The war in Ukraine right now in active phase only for 70 days, and I cannot begin to tell you what atrocities and terror happened here in 60 days. So when NATO is saying, okay, we will react in 60 days, it means we will let many of you killed. Then the question is, do you want to build the security based on what? Based on previous agreements? Well, then you are in a security agreement with Hungary. Or based on trust. And how do you gain this trust and regain this trust? And how do you put together those alliances? In this new world, we will have to ask ourselves an important question of nuclear weapons. Of how do we want to deal with that? Because, you know, after Budapest Memorandum, and I would like to remind everybody that in 1994, Ukraine gave up one of the largest nuclear arsenal in the world for the good and peace and all that stuff. And we had security guarantees from Russia, United Kingdom, United States. There's that. So right now, when I'm talking to my parliamentarian fellows all over the world, they are saying, you know what? We probably will restart working on our nuclear program because we see what happens when you are under attack and what you hear is a condemnation of your enemy rather than full speed support. In this new world, we will have to be very honest with ourselves and differentiate good from bad. Make sure that we do not get into agreements that we cannot fulfill on, but that we also are working towards effective goal. Before we talk of how the new world would look like, I want to come back to the day one of active phase of the war. Kiev started to be bombarded at 5 a.m. And at 6 a.m., Poland opened its borders to Ukrainian citizens so they can get to safety. You did not ask us any questions. You were that neighbor that when you're coming back home and crying, you just knock on the door. He would open the door, give you a cup of tea, and you would talk. And you know, we would never ever forget this. I think it happened because we have mutual history together. Because we, of all nations, do remember the lessons of the Second World War. We do remember what it is like to be a country where the war happens, to be the country whose citizens are suffering. So with this new system that we will be putting together, moving forward after the catastrophe, after the crisis, after we win, I do believe that geographically, mentally, physically, Ukraine, Poland, Baltic countries will have to stay united, will have to have closer connections, and will have to build an alliance, the effective alliance that would actually work. I am extremely thankful to presidents of the countries who came in to visit Kiev and support us. Estonia, Lithuania, who gave us so much of their support and protection. We all know what it is to have Russia as a neighbor. We all know what it is to put aside some money in case Russia would attack. We all know what it is to always look on your side, whatever you are doing, because you have an aggressor staring up at you. This is why I do believe that we will have to form an alliance that is modern, rapid, that is able to be true to yourself, that is able to actually execute rather than stick to the idea of world dominance or the idea of rebuilding the empire. I do believe that the past that we had together is actually the thing that is pushing us toward the future that we need to have together. I do believe that Ukraine will join the European Union. We will be able to make those changes that are needed to be done for it to be effective. And I do believe that in the new security alliance, we need to base it on Baltic countries, Ukraine and Poland together. I would like to thank you all for your support once again. You know, it has been generations since our relatives, since our ancestors have fought the Second World War, but we still are proud of how bravely they fought. So our children and grandchildren will be proud of us, not only because we will win this war, but because of how our countries acted during this war, of how you didn't hesitate to come and help, and how you always stayed on the democratic, on the progressive, on the good guys' side. I thank you for that, and glory to Ukraine.